Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're looking at the next generation herd with Frank Buckley. So as I said, Frank is going to talk to us about some of the lessons from the next generation herd that was set up a good few years ago now at this stage, Frank, in order to future-proof the EBI and to kind of, I suppose, reinforce that the messages of EBI were actually working. So Frank is going to go through the results from the herds down through the last couple of years, and we'll just talk about some of the stuff that's happening with the herd now as well. So hand over to you, so Frank, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. You have to move it on for me now, Stuart, as well.
Yeah, you just say when, Frank, yeah, and I'll go over.
Yeah, so I mean, like most people are familiar with what the next generation herd is about. I mean, it is about future-proofing the EBI and the direction of the National Breeding Programme, and you've already said that, and I suppose it helps us as scientists to be able to identify what we call, more precisely, the drivers of this improved performance, so we can go into more detail than we can if we're just looking at a national data set. So whether that's on individual animals, whether that's looking at various blood metabolites, hormones, body condition score, energy balance, intake, detailed measurements that couldn't ordinarily be done, as I say, at farm level. It also, I suppose, acts as an important point of reference for farmers, because at the end of the day, I mean, we publish the results, we publish the EBIs, the PTAs, be that for the national average, the elite cows, and I suppose most people are somewhere in between, and it allows them to, I suppose, as they reference their performance versus that's being achieved at Moore Park, and it's across 3 different feeding treatments as well, so it gives a fair bit of information, I'd say, that would be of interest from the point of view of breeding and bull selection and so on for individuals. And I suppose a point that I would always make is that it also, I suppose, puts it into context. Some people, as we'll see in the results, I suppose the results should speak for themselves, but oftentimes people are chasing production and chasing PTAs for milk and milk yield and so on. But as we'll see in the presentation, I mean, the PTAs of the elite are maybe not exactly what people might perceive. So it's not all about production, it's about the balance, it's about the appropriate level in terms of the fertility PTAs and so on. And as we'll see in a second, as we'll see in a while when we look at the results, the fertility is a real strong driver within our system of both performance in terms of production, but also in terms of ultimately the profitability. And then I suppose it also then acts as what we call a nucleus of superior genetics. I mean, such as the level of EBI of the elite cows, that from time to time we do have high EBI bull calves of interest to the AI companies. And there are bulls that most people now would be familiar with, like Emer, Candy, and others. Okay, so can you move on then?
Yeah.
So just briefly to give us sort of an insight into the design of the study, and this is the design for the last over the last 3 years. Initially we would have had just black and white, so we just had the elite Holsteins. We would have had 90 of them, we would have had 45 of the national averages, running across 3 different treatments. With the last 3 years we have jerseys incorporated, and so the scale of the study is outlined there. We have 72 elite cows, 36 national average, and 72 high BI jerseys, and they run side by side, and they run across 3 different feeding treatments. So there's 24 elites, 24 jerseys, and 12 national average on each of the different feeding treatments. And I mean, I'm not going to go into detail as to what they are, but they really just reflect, if you like, the variation that exists in general terms in the systems that we advocate and run from the point of view of spring calving grass-based systems. So we have the control system, we have the high concentrate system, and we have the low grass allowance system. And each of the 9 groups run individually, but also the measurements are such that it obviously ensures that all groups or breeds, if you like, are being treated the same across each of the 3 different feeding treatments. And obviously the idea is that, I mean, some would argue that in itself, it's not a particularly large study, but obviously it's run over a number of years. You've new cows joining it every year, and over time it certainly tends to, our experience is that it certainly is robust enough to provide leadership, I suppose, in terms of the future direction and true representation of what the various EBI groups are. Okay. So in terms of the EBI of the cows, this is one of the spring runs. The elite cows at this stage are in they're over 200 EBI. You can see their fertility and milk sub indexes there, 62 and 102. the national average 110, so maybe just marginally above what the national average is, and you can see that they're roughly 40-40 in terms of milk and fertility. We have the Jerseys are made up of two different groups of two different sources, if you like, of genetics. One is New Zealand, and then you have the Danish, right? The Danish were imported as maidens a number of years ago, and they have lower EBI. You can see they're 109, low milk subindex, reasonable in terms of fertility, which might be slightly, again, counterintuitive to what one would expect given the type of systems and so on that are run in Denmark. I mean, indoor systems, TMR diets, high production. So the impression might be that the production performance of these animals should be massive and that their fertility wouldn't be hectic. Now, the fertility isn't hectic, and I'll come back to that in a while, but the New Zealand cows, then you can see they would be sort of, in terms of sourcing, they would be based on LIC and Ambreed genetics from New Zealand. They would be, some of the animals, maybe a quarter of them would be embryos that were imported directly from New Zealand. And then the rest of them are the remnants of the herd that would have been in Ballydeig that we would have maintained and retained the highest DPI, best performing cows or whatever, over time. And the idea was that not alone are the Jerseys brought in the context that they are there as a reference point to compare to the elite Frisian. In other words, the Ballydeig study, it's now at this stage 15 years old, and we've moved on considerably in the genetics and the black and white. And I suppose just to revisit that, the advantage that we saw with Jersey, particularly the crossbreds in terms of the higher fertility, the greater efficiencies and so on, is that still the same? Is that still the case now? And the other point being that it acts as a nucleus of high EBI genetics, I suppose, insulating ourselves some bit from international breeding programs. Okay.
And Frank, just out of interest, with the Danish there with the maintenance at 63, would you notice much of a difference in them relative to the New Zealand Jerseys? I know there's only 10 years in the difference, but
yeah, I suppose what's very obvious, and as time goes on in the presentation, I mean, I'll virtually pretty much ignore the Danish. I mean, they're not suitable. In simple terms, they're not suited to our system. They tend to be reminiscent, if you like, of the genetics that we had in Ireland 20 years ago when we were importing high production Holstein type genetics. I mean, when they calved down, they immediately lost body condition. They were not particularly high capacity animals. They tended to be reasonably shallow. The ribs became very obvious very early, very soon after lactation, and they need, if you like, a high concentrate input at that stage. They don't have the same intake capacity, whereas the New Zealand cows tend to be, they're quite different in appearance. They're more typical of what we expect, I suppose, of Jersey. Low stature, very high capacity, very bellyish, if you want to call it that in simple terms. Whereas the Danish tend to be more shallow. They just don't have that same intake capacity or that real strong characteristic that we associate with high merit Jerseys, if you like, in the context of our system. And they hold condition better and tend to go on calf easier. Do you know what I mean? So the Danish cows perform well on the high concentrate diet, but they don't perform terribly well outside of that. So it's very, very much, I suppose, what I would call a classic G by E. So they are bred and perform in an environment that's very, very high nutritional intensity, if you like, from the point of view of their TMR diets. I mean, they're unbelievable, really, in terms of the quality of the diet. It's managed in such a way that the animals maintain their body condition score. So in their environment, they look really, really well. They perform really, really well. But unfortunately, when you bring them into ours, where they're minimal concentrates and reliant on grass and so on, they just don't perform as well. So that's sort of, in simple terms, a summary of their performance. And as I say, we've almost, weeded them out almost at this stage, or they've weeded themselves out, because we haven't tended to use much Danish genetics in the last number of years.
Okay.
So, and this is just right. So I showed you the EBIs of the different breed groups, and this is just to put it into context nationally. So I mean, you can see as a herd. I mean, if we take it that the elite cows are over 200 EBI, 210 is what I showed you there. Like on the basis of individual animals, they're in the top 10%, top 1% of animals in the herd nationally. So so they are extremely high EBI animals. I mean, And even the jerseys are in the top 5% on an individual animal basis, but they're in the top, also well inside the top 1% from the point of view of herds in the country. Okay. So, and I suppose some of this presentation obviously was for a different purpose, but it's still important to make the point that all of the research information that I'm going to present here today, albeit that I'll be just skimming over the surface, if you like, is published internationally. So this is, as you said, the study is ongoing now since 2013. We've a PhD completed, we have another PhD well advanced, and consequently, a lot of this information, be it the milk production characteristics of the animals, be it their intake, feed conversion efficiency, grazing behavior, fertility performance and survival. We've done economic analysis, and we've also done some work in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions and their nutrient use efficiency and so on. And so all of this data, all of that information is, we have a lot of detail on that at this point, and it's all been analyzed in detail, and it's been published scientifically in the Journal of Dairy Science primarily, which is the highest ranking journal that we as production scientists, if you like, in the dairy field can submit to. So it's, it's just to make that point that this is all scientifically published and so on.
And also the huge amount of information that came out of the studies, Frank, as well, to be fair.
Yeah, so I mean, that just gives you an idea of the type of work that we're doing and the level of detail that obviously wouldn't be possible if you were just looking at a national data set, okay? And, even to give an example, even on top of this, it's not published yet, but Stephen Butler, for example, in recent years, Stephen Butler and Stephen Moore have done a lot of work looking at taking biopsies from the cows, uterine biopsies, mammary biopsies and so on, and, working at the much deeper molecular hormonal level, if you like, in terms of what's making these two different strains, whether we're talking about the national average and the elite. Well, in particular those, and then more recently now we're also looking at some of the, production characteristics. So looking at more detail in terms of the different proteins and carbohydrates and whatnot within the milk with a view to, seeing can we add further value, or what is the EBI doing in terms of the characteristics of the milk, at a deeper, more functional level than straight protein, fat, and so on.
Yeah.
So you can move on. Oh yes. So okay. So what I have here, I was intending to show maybe later as well. This is the first 4 years, so it's from Morgan O'Sullivan's PhD, and it showed, the first 4 years the animals were young. They began as first calvers. They were second calvers, then first and second calvers in year 2 of the study, first, second, and third, and then first, second, third, and fourth. So this is based on a young production profile, if you like. And I suppose I should say, which I didn't say, that we'll say this result, for example, and the results that come directly from the study are based on the fact that each year, I showed the numbers, I showed the profile of how the study designed, but what I didn't say is that within each of the genotypes, each year, there's the same proportion of first calvers, second calvers, third calvers, or first, second, and mature cows was at this stage, and the calving date is kept more or less the same as well. So these results are sort of all else being equal. This is the genetic difference between the animals, so it doesn't factor in, if you like, the implications of differences in fertility and so on. But I will come to that later. So when we run the animals, we'll say, with the same age profile, with the same length of lactation, if you like, this is the sort of difference that arise. So they're relatively modest. The elite cows have slightly lower milk yield. They have much higher milk composition. You can see they've almost 0.3 higher fat and almost 0.2 higher protein. You can see in terms of kilos of fat and protein, it's about 10 kilos more over the entire lactation. So that's a very small amount per day. It's almost unnoticeable. And I was going to, as I present the profiles, but it's something in the order of 0.02, 0.03 kilos of fat and protein per day over the 280 days of lactation. As time has moved on, these the cows have matured, so these values have increased slightly. We'll say the volume have increased, and the differential between the two strains has become typically around 12 kilos per 12 to 14, even in some years, per lactation. Okay.
I suppose the point there, Frank, though, is like even with the reduced yield, we'll say, which people might hone in on, you're still looking at €50 of extra solids value there, like.
Yeah, and that's everything like with like, all else being equal, grazing the same,
Yeah.
post grazing height, same age structure, same parity length, and so on. And it reflects, I mean, that in simple terms reflects the weightings within the EBI. I mean, we have a negative on volume, but we have a positive on kilos of fat and protein, and that's what's coming through, and that's coming through very clearly and very consistently, as I say, over the years. As the animals have matured, the differences have got slightly bigger from the point of view of the yield, and the composition differences have stayed more or less the same. Maybe they've come closer slightly, but yeah, you know, it's very, very consistent. That's the beauty of the results, and that's how we can, you know, stand over it very, very clearly from the point of view of both production and fertility. At the results I'm showing here, it's not that this is the average and that it wavered up and down considerably over years. I mean, it's been very, very consistent. Anyone that's been following it, you know, there's not a lot new in the presentation. Everything is as it has been before. And you can see the cell count there. While there's very, very small difference in PTA for health, if you like, between the two genotypes, I mean, the cell count has consistently been slightly more favorable for the elite cows. So they do tend to get slightly less mastitis, and they do tend to have a slightly lower cell count. But you can see for both herds, both groups, it's been very good, and it's something I suppose that's strong on the farm generally.
Okay, and just going back to the Danish jerseys there then as well, Frank, they had a really high health status index there. So would you have noticed much of a, would say, another step up in terms of the reduced mastitis in their cases?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Scandinavian countries, and the same would have been the case when we were looking at the Norwegian Reds, they tend to have very detailed, much more detailed data as far as other health is concerned, particularly incidence of mastitis, and they've had a negative weighting on it for longer. So yeah, they would tend to be slightly superior in that regard, yeah.
So, but it's just, I suppose, what I'm getting at is, I suppose, it reinforces the impact of the positive selection for health, like so.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, and we'll see it now when we go into the fertility, and that's the one that's most remarkable, if you like, and it's the one that I suppose presents the greatest lesson. You know, not alone the success that EBI is and the breeding program and what it's achieved in a relatively short time, given the generation interval, if you like, for breeding, cattle breeding, but it's a real important lesson to the wider breeding community, if you like, internationally, that of the power that can be achieved once the correct weightings are there. But of course, you have to have the weightings, but you have to have the information there in terms of the data to be able to generate the breeding values and so on. But you know, it's remarkable, and it has been consistent, and in fact the fertility, if anything, has improved slightly over time in terms of the differential, or in terms of the performance of the two groups. So this again is the first 4 years, and you can see, you know, the submission rates are generally high in both groups, but they are consistently slightly higher with the elite cows, so almost every single year over 90%. Pregnancy rate at first service, you can see there over 60%. Pregnancy rate in 6 weeks, not to be confused with calving rate. So this is the proportion of cows that go and calf in the first 6 weeks of the breeding season, and you can see there in the first 4 years that was 73%. That's actually, if we take the last 3 years, so if we take 2017, 18, 19, and actually if we were to include this year as well, that's almost 80%. It has been 79%, and this year it was I think 85% in 6 weeks. So it would be probably bang on 80% conception rate in 6 weeks over the last, as I say, 4 years. With the national average group, you can see there it was higher this year again. I mean, this year's fertility performance was particularly good across the board. So we're probably talking nearly 60%, you know, which is still nicely off the target of 70% plus.
And Frank, is that down to the increasing EBI of both herds, we'll say, year on year?
I suppose. I mean, at the end of the day, with the elite cows, the EBI is increasing year on year, albeit gradually. With the national average cows, it is increasing as well, in line with the national average. And I suppose while there wasn't a huge improvement with the national average cows for maybe the first 4 or 5 years, there does seem to be a slight improvement in the last 2 years, in terms of their pregnancy rates and their 6 week in calf rates. Yeah. So in terms of in calf rate, then, so the 12 weeks there, we breed for 12 weeks, and that's generally based on 6 weeks AI and 6 weeks mop-up bulls. You can see there that the elite cows in the first 4 years was 92%, and with the national average group, it was 19% empty. So
is another point there then, Frank, as well, because of the nature of the study and the fact that you were keeping everything the same as well, that national average herd still had a very good 6-week calving rate every year at the start. So like they calved with a reasonable herd of cows.
That's right. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, if there was a flaw, if you like, in the study, but it's one that I suppose is not difficult to overcome from the point of view of how we run the study, and it's important that we run the study the way we do to be fair to each genotype across all the different measurements that we do, and in terms of grass allowance and stocking rates and all the rest of it. But there's no doubt about it. In terms of fertility, we're favouring the national average, if you like, in the sense that we're correcting their calving pattern every year, which gives them a better chance. Whereas if it was to roll on as it would do naturally at farm level, well, then there would be slippage every year. In terms of the elite cows, they haven't been slipping much at all, whereas the national average cows tend to be slipping maybe up to 4 days per year. And so obviously after a number of years, that's a pretty big slip, and has a negative impact on fertility, because you've a shorter interval between calving and first insemination, and that's one of the biggest factors that influences fertility per se as well. So the differences that we're seeing are probably best case scenario, if you like.
Yeah, they'd be more exaggerated than a normal herd scenario, like commercial situation. So
the next slide is just then if you like, the implication of this in terms of survival, and you can just click it again to bring up the few figures. So I mean, this was an analysis that we did based on the first tranche of the study, and it basically showed that the elite cows lasted, almost 60% of them lasted to the start of 5th lactation, whereas for the national average cows, if you click it again, it's 36%. So
pretty stark figure, like.
So that's quite stark. So what so it really, it really.
It's 20 cows and 100 cows, like.
Yeah, and that's the culmination of the fertility performance. But again, as you said, had it been run naturally, if anything, it's likely to have been bigger.
Mm.
But based on the way the study is run each year, and the percentages that were falling out, once they didn't go in calf or left the study for any reason. So I mean, that would also include cows that were culled because of mastitis, that dropped dead from grass tetany, which you're going to have the odd one because they're cows at the end of the day. So if they left the study and were not there to survive to perform the following year, they dropped. They
were knocked out, and they're considered as having fallen off regardless of what category they were in. Like, but that's
the driver would have been fertility, but there would be other elements in there as well.
That's a pretty, like, again, when you think back to the fact that you're constantly correcting the national average group there, like it's fairly daunting figures really when you've 20% with a corrected situation, like. So if you were to say you were to take a 12-week breeding season, be very religious in relation to that at a commercial level, and and if a cow is empty after 12 weeks, she's empty, then there's 20 cows in 100 cow herds aren't going to survive to 5th lactation when they're on a national average EBI.
Yeah, but as you said, if you were to allow it to, that's having corrected it. So I mean, so having corrected it, we take the cows that have been on the study and that went on the study each year, and then it's, that consequently dropped out. If it was farm level, and we can touch on that sort of later, even though I don't have the detail of it, I suppose in the presentation, is that if it was how would I say, as would happen organically on farms, that the animals would slip, well then the in-calf rates would actually be slightly lower each year. So if anything, I would say more realistically at farm level, that might be 57 versus 30, say.
Okay. Yeah.
But this is as it was in the study.
Okay.
So then, I mean, this is the implications. I mean, the other thing I suppose that I haven't included in there is the fact that we have measured intake on them, and We have measured efficiencies. There were a couple of the slides that I had slotted in, but for whatever reason in transition there, my computer froze. You know, the elite cows do have better body condition. And how they achieve that is they have the same intake as the elite cows. In energy terms, the elite cows have a slightly higher energy demand. The elite cows the elite cows tend to put slightly more of the partition, slightly more of the energy that they consume onto their backs, if you like. So they are, you know, it's very small, but they're slightly inefficient, if you want to call it that, on a given daily basis, in terms of their milk production ability. But obviously, from the point of view of the system and the efficiency and the profitability of the system, and that goes for every definition, if you like, of efficiency, be it feed efficiency or be it environmental efficiency or whatever. The elite cows, because of their greater survival, their lower need for replacements and so on to be reared and so on, they're much more efficient. But as I say, that's an interesting, because in many countries where they would be selecting for efficiency, it's sort of net efficiency on a daily basis or whatever, and it's based on trying to maintain production and reduce intake. And to me, that's a dangerous combination. I mean, that's where we would have been in the past, and that's, if you like, what constitutes what I described there for the Danish Jerseys, in the sense that they're not capable of eating, you know, on a pasture-based system, they're not capable of eating sufficient, and that results in losing body condition, has a negative impact then in fertility and so on and so on. And so it's you know, it's an important attribute. It's something that we don't select for directly, but it's a consequence of the relative weighting. So in order to be fertile, you must be able to eat more grass, you must be able to eat more than you require, if you like, for your production, and put it on to maintain energy balance and so on. And that's what they do, and that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of the type of research that we can do, that we can monitor and observe these things and give guidance then to the breeding program going forward, you know. So if we just, in terms of the profit then, and if you want to, you can just click it again there once or twice, and you know, so the overall, so I mentioned about the production, right? And this is a very interesting one, in the sense that, so over the lactation, over the first four years of the study, I mean, the average difference as run on the study in terms of kilos of fat and protein, as I showed, was 10, and that increased as time went on. That went up to 12, as I say. But when we allow for the differences in fertility and the differences in replacement rate, so in terms of replacement rate, the differences that would be modeled here would be 18% versus 28%. So in effect, what it is the empty rate plus 10% of the remaining cows assumed culled for voluntary culling. And so that changes obviously the dynamic of the herd from the point of view of the parity structure. And I suppose just to give you an idea of what that would be, I just happen to have the paper here in front of me published on that. So for the elite cows, you're talking 18 first calvers coming in every year. There'd be 15 second calvers, 13 third calvers, and then you'd have 64 mature cows, if you like. Whereas with the national average, you'll have 28% of the animals are being replaced. So in a typical herd, you'll have 28 first calvers, about 21 second calvers, and the result is that in terms of mature cows, less than half of the cows would be in their fourth lactation or greater. Like, you know, so that obviously then means that you have an older age profile, you have a more productive profile, and the net effect when we model it here is that it works out at about 41 kgs of milk solids per cow, which is huge. The overall outcome in terms of the profit difference is over 200 euros per cow per year, which is in line with the EBI differences. In fact, it is over 200. So, I mean, depending on the analysis that we've done, it's somewhere between 220, 250 per cow per year. But the interesting point is that almost 80% of that difference in profit is either directly or indirectly associated with fertility. Okay, so if you go back to the beginning, there's only a 20 euro difference in the PTA differences, you know, for production. For the sub indexes, I think it's 60, just over 60 versus 40. And you know, people often get carried away with trying to increase the production sub-indexes of their herd, but it's very, very important, and I think it should be clear from this slide in particular that, you know, the biggest driver of the profit and the productivity of the herd is actually the fertility. So long lactations, calving earlier, and more mature cows. I mean, that's the key to good to profit, and that hopefully is clear from this. Okay.
Yeah.
And drives, if you like, that's what drives the recommendation that we have in terms of the, you know, trying to achieve €100 fertility sub-index in your when you're generating your young female stock.
Yeah. It's interesting, I suppose, like that, given all things being equal, kind of like that, it's just diverging so much. Like that's like there's your 200 and your milk solids alone. There's your €200.
Yeah. So and there's about another. You know, I think in the analysis that we did, in the last analysis, which was based on, let's say, the first 4 or 5 years of the study, I think it's 260 per cow is what came out. So yeah, but almost 200 of that, as you say, is down to. So that's my point. That 80% of it is down
to herd maturity, really, like. Yeah, and just cows staying in the herd for longer. And obviously, you're going to touch on it in a minute as well, like, but there's implications there from an environmental perspective then as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, that's the other important one. I mean, we have done work there in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and that. And what we're seeing is that, you know, as I said, on a per hectare basis, if you like, the intake capacity, if you like, of the two different herds is similar. So they're grazing the same amount of grass, if you like, and but it's how they partition then that's different. And basically what we see is that, if you like, putting it kind of simply in a per cow or in a per hectare basis, that there's very little difference between the elite and the national average. But where the difference comes true is that the elite cows are much more productive relative to the national average for that given intake, if you like, or that given utilization of per hectare pasture or whatever. And as a consequence, there's a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per unit of milk produced. So whether, I mean, in this slide it's shown there as fat and protein corrected milk, but per kilo milk solids equally, it's about the same. You know, it's a 10 or 11% improvement in greenhouse gas emissions or environmental efficiency, if you like. And also what we're seeing there is in terms of the nitrogen use efficiency. So obviously nitrogen is a potential pollutant from the point of view of water quality and so on. And again, the elite cows, because of the production characteristics, you know, and also built within this is the fact that you've less replacements. I mean, this is the totality of the system. You know, they are slightly higher in terms of their use of protein in the system as well, and of nitrogen consequently. So it's just a positive. You know, it's very, very positive to be able to show that not alone from the point of view of profit and the sustainability in that regard are the high EBI cows delivering, but they are more environmentally friendly as well. And a lot of that is because, as I say, it's the combination. It's the higher productivity together with, in particular, the higher fertility, and it's, again, the fertility is the key driver of this as well as it is the profit. You know? And,
yeah, and I suppose
what we're saying, what we've often said, is that a lot of these positive technologies, if you like, that will contribute to improvements in environmental efficiency, they also improve
farm profitability. Like, yeah. I suppose the other point, I think the figure there, just even the national average are very efficient even in that study there, because I think the study or the National Farm Survey figure is something like 26% for nitrogen use efficiency currently. So they're still, the national average are even still doing well in your study there. Like,
yeah, and I suppose that's all a reflection of, I mean, the end day it's management. But what we're interested in here is the relative differences, and there might be slight differences too in the methodologies, which I wouldn't be familiar with. But
yeah. And obviously, there's a target there for nitrogen use efficiency in the region of 35%. So you'd be hoping to achieve that over the next number of years, I suppose, as EBI increases again.
That's right.
Okay, very good.
So, I mean, the next part of the presentation is just you know, what is the role of Jersey? I mean, the previous, what we've done today, they're showing clearly that EBI is working. The National Breeding Programme is delivering. or at least will deliver for everyone if they continue to use high BI bulls. And I suppose improvements in fertility are key. I mean, for most part, it's not optimum at fair level. So I mean, the finger needs to be kept on, or the foot needs to be kept on that pedal to ensure that people continue in the right direction. And obviously, there's a lot of elements to what's going to deliver that. But at least, like the next gen herd and the comparison that I've just gone through there gives it's very positive in terms of that it will deliver. But then there's the issue of Jersey, and I suppose this is more contentious. But what I've done is put together a few slides to just maybe bring people along in terms of why do we persist with this issue of jerseys despite maybe some of the negative press. And I suppose in theory it's about these are the three reasons. They are of varying or degrees of importance, I suppose, particularly in our system compared to maybe internationally. But I mean, one is it removes the issues of inbreeding, which is always going to be there in closed breeding, within straight breeds, if you like. I mean, where you're selecting, you're always going to be narrowing the gene pool in theory, and as a consequence, increasing the rate of inbreeding. Now, that's not a particular issue in Ireland, but in other countries, particularly in South America and so on, it is, or North America. The two latter, I suppose, are probably more important, more relevant when we talk about Jersey crossbreeding. And one is the whole complementarity between the two breeds. I mean, I don't need to spell it out, I don't think, but apart from the obvious, the Jersey, because of its small size, together with the one innate characteristic that it does have is the ability to eat more relative to its size, means that it is a much more efficient animal. Okay, and so that, together with the other issues like its small size, its high output from the point of view of fat and protein, they're complementary to the weight including the EBI, makes this composite animal particularly suited to our system of production, and be that the pasture-based element, but also in terms of what we're producing and where that product goes. The other element then, which is the one that most people will be familiar with, but I'm not sure they completely understand how it works, is the issue of heterosis or hybrid vigor. And I mean, you can see in the graph there, I mean, in theory, what it means is that if you cross two breeds, A and B, and you expect to get somewhere in the average, but the reality is you tend for some traits to get more. And it's basically the additional performance over and above what we call the mid-parent mean. And I'd say that does vary from trait to trait. I don't have the detail in the presentation, but it means that in particular for traits like fertility and health, and I suppose in particular fertility, you would tend to see a high level of expression of this. So in the order of 20%, 25% even. So, and I suppose the best example of that is if you go to New Zealand, and this analysis has been done a few times over the last 20 years. And basically, if you take the pure Friesians, pure Jerseys, cross them, the crossbred animal will last on average almost one lactation more. So if you take the typical survival of somewhere between 4 and 5 lactations, almost one lactation more is in the order of 20-25%. For things like milk yield, body weight, those kind of continuous traits, or as we call them, the level tends to be around 5%. So now, that figure of 5% doesn't really mean anything from a practical point of view. So what I've done is I've taken an example, if you like, just to try and bring people through to help your understanding of it. But I suppose just in fundamental terms, breed complementarity and heterosis are the basic reasons as to why we persist, if you like, with this Jersey thing. So if you want to just move on there. And ultimately, this is what it's about. And then this is a slide from New Zealand that shows on average the economic heterosis. So the heterosis, if you like, that's expressed across the various traits and put them together, it equates to somewhere in the region of $90 per cow per lactation. And in Ireland, that's somewhere in the region of between 100 and 150 euros per cow per lactation. And that's just a reflection of the contrasting, if you like, between the two breeds, Jersey and Friesian, and the economic situation, the relative economic values, I suppose, on the traits as applied here in Ireland. Okay, so
that's
overall,
nearly 40 years old then as well, Frank.
Well, sorry, That's the theory. Sorry.
Well,
The
I
core
know, but
norm
I'm
is
just making the point like that
the theory.
it's still
But
there.
no,
Like.
no, sorry, sorry. This was again from a different presentation, but the 40 years old is the theory of heterosis. Sorry, this
Studies
particular
backing it up.
analysis actually was 2014.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, it was previously
the
done in
one down there.
2005 with
Yeah.
Ben Harris. It's been since updated. So, yeah, 2014 is probably where that actual information comes from.
Yeah, I suppose the point I was making, I wasn't knocking it. No, I was making the point that it's still the
Oh, well,
same.
yeah, well,
Crossbreeding is
I
still
hadn't
bringing the
seen.
same gain, like. So.
Yeah. But so I'm just taking you through a theoretical example, just so people can understand, what this heterosis is contributing. Okay, and it's, again, it's about maths. It's no different to any breeding value computation, if you like. It's all based on maths. It's all based on averages. And if we just take that in a given environment, Holstein Friesians producing 6,000 kilos. If we say in the Jersey environment that, in the same environment that pure Jersey cows would produce 4,200 kilos. If we cross them, the average between the two breeds would be 5,100. But if we take what I'd call an intermediate hybrid vigor value, so it's up to 6% is what you would find in the literature. So what I'm doing, between 2 and 5% is what generally would be found in the literature. So what I've done is I've taken a 4, which is the midway, and incidentally, when we talk about heterosis, not alone does it vary between traits, but it also varies between breeds. And the greater expression is generally the more genetically distant the breeds are. And if we take Jersey and Holsteins, they tend to be as genetically distant as is possible within, the type of cows that we have, the Bos Taurus cows. So for that reason, I would have been well within my, how would I say, justified to be able to put in 6% there, but I'm just putting in 4% because I'm just trying to give the example and I'd say not to over-egg it.
Yeah,
so you can see there
it's adding another 102 kilos in if you go to the 6. Yeah.
204 kilos.
Another, yeah, okay. It's adding 102 onto the 204, bringing you up to 306 of a difference. If you go using the 6% hybrid vigor instead, like.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, but so the point is that, okay, instead of 5.1, these cows are capable of producing 5,300. I suppose, right, the question is then, well, sure, okay, that means that you wouldn't do it, but that's only one part of the story. So if you flick onto the next slide, what I've done is I've just inputted typical composition differences between the breeds. Okay, so 4.2 fat, 3.4 protein, and I think that's probably fair enough given that I've said 6,000 kilos. And with the Jersey here, 4.2 and 5.9, I think they're the figures that we're getting in the next gen herd. Mm-hmm. And if you cross them, we don't get heterosis in terms of composition per se. So the 5.05% fat there that I have is actually intermediate between the two, and similarly the 3.8 protein is intermediate between the two. Okay, so it's the yield that's driving the heterosis element of the thing. So if we take the milk yields that we achieved, we'll say in the previous slide, and slot in those compositions, this is the outcome: 456 kilos of fat and protein for that Holstein Friesian within that environment, 424 for the Jersey per cow, whereas the crossbred 469. And I mean, again, it might seem that that's all very convenient in terms of the choosing those figures, but if you go on to the next slide, I mean, all of the research that we have done in the last number of years, whether it's Ballydaig, whether it's using commercial data, whether it's down at Clonakilty, I mean, the Jersey crossbred always consistently outperforms, the Friesians that we're running side by side, and they would be high VI Friesians or whatever. And you can see that typically the crossbreds tend to outperform. So it's not fictitious. This is what happens has happened on the ground, if you like. Okay. So then, just to see how the animals are performing in Ballydaig, in the next gen herd. So I said that the Jerseys are there for the last 3 years, so we've 2 years of data, and you can see here that the comparison for the last 2 years of the elite national average, the New Zealand jerseys and the Danish jerseys. So the Danish jerseys, which might be surprising to some, have lower performance from a production point of view than the Danish or than the New Zealand genetics. So you can see there's over 200 kilos of milk difference over lactation. There's lower fat content, there's lower protein content, and consequently you can see there about 50 kilos of fat and protein over lactation, which is considerable. You can see that they're marginally lighter. So you asked about the maintenance previously. That's going through there. They have lower body condition, so you can see it's a considerable drop, almost 0.2 body condition score, which is a lot. It's very, very noticeable. It's nearly a quarter of a condition score. You can see there in terms of efficiency, which I suppose here you can see across the two Jersey breeds, but also compared to the black and whites. I mean, kilos of milk solids produced over lactation divided by body weight. You can see that the elite cows are achieving 0.88, the national average 0.85. The New Zealand Jersey cows, 1.08 times body weight over lactation, and the Danish cows are just over 1. In terms of fertility performance, I mean, when we go back to the Ballydaig era, if you like, I mean, one of the issues with the Jerseys was that when we crossed them on the Friesians, we got really, really good fertility, and we got the benefit of the complementarity from the point of view and the heterosis from the point of view of the production characteristic. Today, we have a scenario where the elite cows are performing really, really well. They have exceptionally good fertility, textbook fertility. The Jersey cows in Ballydaig were no better than the Friesian cows, if you like. If anything, they were slightly worse in terms of fertility, whereas the modern day Jersey genetics, interestingly, as we've seen here in this study, is keeping pace almost with the elites in terms of fertility. So their 6-week calf rate is very, very respectable. I mean, it's over 70%. It's within the targets. You can see that the 12-week calf rate is on a par with the elites, so it's less than 10% empty. But if you go back up to those composition, for example, and the production levels, you can see there 5.75 fat, 4.18 protein, yielding 445 kilos of fat and protein, which is 12 kilos lower than the elite, but it's the same as the national average. And bearing in mind that these cows are smaller, so they're stocked heavier. So if we were to do a simple or crude analysis from the point of view of solids per hectare, I mean, the New Zealand Jerseys would come out on top entirely, okay? But they don't have as much of the negative in terms of the cull cow value and so on is an issue. Obviously, it's lower, and that would be factored into any economic analysis. But where fertility is high, that's much less of an issue. Yeah. So the next slide is just I mentioned previously about the intake capacity, and you can see here this is based on intakes that were conducted over the last few years, and you can see that the elite and national average are coming out to similar intakes. The Jerseys are lower, but if we look at intake relative to body weight, so the elite cows are slightly lighter. I think I might have glanced over that, or actually, that slide was missing. So they're about, depending on the stage of lactation, they're roughly 10 kilos lighter, so it's not a huge difference. But they have their intake relative to body weight of the elite cows is slightly better than the national average. So as I was saying previously, that extra 0.1, if you like, of a percent is what goes into the body condition and improves their body condition. It doesn't come back out in terms of milk. The Jersey cows, you can see they're at 3.8. So what that's saying really is that the elite cows and the national average cows are reaching just over 3% of their body weight per day in terms of dry matter, whereas the Jersey cows are reaching 3.8%. So that's that higher intake capacity relative to their body weight. And it does then enable them, as you can see here in terms of milk solids per 100 kilo body weight, to have a considerably higher output relative to their body weight as well. And that's how the efficiencies, if you like, can manifest themselves. Okay. So what I've done then, I mean, the question is often asked, right? Would you cross the elite cows with Jersey? What is there any advantage? And all we can do here is, I mean, we can run through the model. We have concrete performance for the national average, we have concrete performance for the elite, we have concrete performance for the jerseys. And if we were to cross these jerseys and the performance that we're achieving with jerseys with either the national average or the elite, what would be the outcome? And this is what the outcome is likely to be based on the estimates, based on our best estimates, based on the scientific research that we've conducted in the past or that's conducted internationally. So it's using those heterosis values as appropriate and using sort of the median type values that you might expect from the literature. And I mean, there's no evidence to say, it is said from time to time that, with elite high EBI cows, there's not likely to be any benefit from the point of view of heterosis, but there's absolutely no evidence anywhere in the world to support that. And I suppose the way we would have factored it in terms of this analysis is that we will have assumed no improvement or no heterosis value in terms of the fertility. So in other words, I'm assuming that the elite cows have excellent fertility, as we outlined. To me, it's more or less textbook. I don't think it can be improved anymore, to be fair. And so a crossbred onto them is not going to improve any further. So there's no point in saying otherwise. So that part of the equation is taken out, if you like. But it is assumed that the crossbred will have a similar fertility performance. Whereas some of the benefits in terms of the heterosis, if you like, would occur in terms of the production. So I do think we would get that 4% kick in terms of production. I do think we would get a slightly bigger cow. So I mean, you cross the Jersey with the elite cow. So the elite cow about 550 kilos, the Jersey about 400 kilos. You expect 475 would be the average. But obviously, because of heterosis in the region again of about 4%, you'll expect that animal will be in the region of about 500 kilos like that. And just what it's showing there is that if we cross the national average, if you like, with these high BI jerseys, then we can expect that the performance would be somewhere akin, in terms of production, fertility, and so on, to the elite. If we cross the elite with these high BI jerseys, we will expect a performance that's greater than the elite. That said, it's not as great as what it would have been when we crossed the national average, or if you like, when we crossed the cows in Ballydeig many years ago. We were showing at that stage 180 euros per cow per lactation. In this instance, if we go down to the net profit per cow, we're talking 844 with the elite versus 873. So we're talking 30 euros per cow. So that really means that it's down to choice. It's not a particularly large benefit. And you could argue in practical terms it's no benefit at all. But that is with the elite, with the very, very top, the 0.1% of the country. So whereas the vast majority of people in the country are nearer to the national average, well, obviously they are, on average, they're at the national average. So the benefit going from national average to crossing with Jersey is, over 200 euros per cow per lactation in one cross. And after that, it's people's choice.
And is that slide more or less identifying, so Frank, the reasons why some of the people that did crossbreed originally are feeling that they're not getting the kick that they got out of breeding now? That they feel that they're not making the same level of progress as they did in the past? Is it just because they used the crossbreed originally to jump forward, like you're showing there with the national average or crossed with the Jersey, and now they're using the elite genetics, they're not getting any real benefit in terms of the fertility maybe? So after using Jersey genetics, they're obviously just improving small increments maybe, and if they're going back to high EBI black and white, they're probably only doing something similar, so that there's a lot of the high performing herds, or the high genetic herds, we'll say, are people that were really took on the research from Ballydeig originally, kind of the opinion that they're not getting this bounce out of genetics anymore. Is that the reason that it is that they're just kind of at the top of the scale now, and it's very hard to get any further increase as a result of it? Like,
yeah, well, it's just like anything. It's even like the next generation herd. I mean, we're now 8 years in, and we are continuing to improve slightly, but they're very small increments. Once you're at the top, you're depending on the next best bulls to come up to be able to bring you a little bit further, because you're there if you like. So it's about holding it, I suppose, as much as anything else, but or improving slightly. I mean, yeah, the same with when the guys that will have crossbred, and particularly those that would have come from, we call it typical national average type black and white background. I mean, they've seen a considerable kick in terms of both the solids and the fertility, and yeah, I mean, it all depends on where they went after that, but it'll be small incremental improvements thereafter, and I mean, that is the beauty of crossbreeding, if you like, in the context of Ireland, is that, and it's unique in terms of its our ability, I suppose, to produce this ultimate cow, in the sense that we have a fantastic breeding program within the black and whites to identify, the really, really best genetics from the point of view of that balance between production and fertility, and that can be seen in not alone the solids that we are seeing here with the next generation study, but nationally it's increasing hugely. But the fact that you can then also capitalize, if you like, on some of these other genetics from other very successful breeding programs in the world, that are quite contrasting, that can give you that heterosis, that will give you that robustness, if you like, in terms of hardiness, fertility, whatever you want to call it, and maintain that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly if that answers the question, but
yeah, no, I think it does. Like, I just we've a lot of people that are kind of disappointed with the performance that they've been getting. But as I said, they're at the upper end already, and that the bounce that they're getting each year, they're kind of just a little bit disappointed with the level of an increase that they're getting. They feel that they should be getting more. But
from which aspect now?
From their breeding programs, regardless of whether it's Jersey genetics or black and white genetics,
Yeah. But I suppose the one thing that I would say that this and a couple of other slides just previous would show is that, I mean, obviously the next gen study from the point of view of the black and whites demonstrates clearly the huge progress that's been made, and potentially they are available to capitalize on for the average farmer. But it also does show me very, very clearly that the Jersey performance, if we compare that to what we would have achieved in Ballydaig 15 years ago, I mean, it also demonstrated that there's been huge genetic progress in that breed as well. Okay. Now, obviously, we can get onto the negatives as well in a second, but just from the point of view of why we would be advocating Jersey, from the point of view of the efficiencies they deliver, the massive improvements that can be achieved in composition and ultimately solids, and the efficiency then with which that can be produced. The early years of the Jersey component of the next gen study would certainly justify that, and certainly show that there's still huge merits in that, and I think some of the research or some of the analysis that ICBF will have done recently will also concur with that. I mean, the crossbred herds are the best herds. On average, they are the best. I mean, if you take the average of them versus the average in black and whites, those that chose to go down that route, there's quite a considerable difference between them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just
so actually this can probably be skipped over. I don't know how we are for time, but that can probably, what this is in recent times in Moore Park, there's been looking at methane specifically, and we have the green breed, the green feed machines, and the animals can come and take a small amount of concentrates, and a sample of their breath is taken, and we can quantify the amount of methane being produced by those animals. And on that study that's currently being run in Moore Park, there's Jersey cross cows along with Friesian cows, and in terms of the quantity of methane being emitted, you can see there, if you look at the top one that you've the top circle there, on the top left, it's showing that there's no difference between the absolute quantity being produced. If we look at the just below then, the second circle down below, the methane relative to the kilos of solids, it's higher with the black and whites, and that is significantly higher. I've said the other one is similar, but because statistically it's similar. And then methane per kilo of milk solids with age. So again, it just makes the point that as cows get older, that they're producing more and they get more efficient. They produce
they're putting more of their energy and
Yeah.
into milk
Yeah.
production, which is an output as opposed to trying to grow
That's right.
themselves.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So again, tying into the whole fertility, if you like, point.
Yeah.
And and again, this is just again making the point that internationally, there's a lot of work showing that those cows that are more feed efficient are more efficient environmentally. So
Yeah.
it's just again adding to that point that whether you're talking about IBI, whether you're talking about Jersey crossbreeding, that as we improve the productivity, the efficiency, the fertility, we are improving the feed efficiency and similarly improving the both the environmental efficiency from the point of view of nutrient use efficiency and I'd say the whole methane element. So,
Yeah, so selecting for EBI is obviously driving environmental performance as well,
yeah,
like is
yeah,
long and the short of it. Yeah.
yeah.
So this is the contentious issue of your
So
presentation, of
there's the
course.
conscious issue, and maybe I haven't helped it by the first point there. Is it overplayed? I mean, the point I'm trying to make there, I suppose, is that if we take, I mean, Donna Berry would have done an analysis there a couple of years ago at this stage, and it's published in Journal Dairy Science, where he looked at the carcass characteristics of cattle off of Jersey crossbred cows. So it would have been if you have a Jersey crossbred cow compared to a Frisian cow, and if you made her to Frisian or made her to Angus, what is the differential in terms of the progeny? And what it's showing is that basically for every 1% of Jersey in the dam, there is a €1 reduction in the carcass value of the progeny. So typically, €50 difference in
50-50 crosses, like
off of a 50-50 crossbred cow. So that animal is at 25% Jersey in itself, but it will be €2. It'll be about €50 lower carcass, and that's sort of in line with what's redeemable, if you like, or has been in the past anyway with calves. But it just makes the point that, I mean, yes, there's a tail end in it, but as a general picture, that differential is maybe slightly overplayed. But I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, at the end of the day, they have a lower economic value, and the response, those that use genetics, I mean, we would advocate that they must use it responsibly and similarly manage the calf crop responsibly. And the first point that we would advocate is that they should try to, and this may actually be an issue, to be fair, for dairying in general, but that the lower value beef calf or lower value male calves need to be minimized, or you could say, if possible, or as much as possible, eliminated, and that's through using a combination of sex semen and maximizing the proportion mated to suitable beef stocks. I mean, you have the Dairy Beef Index, you have various calf to beef integration initiatives, both with ourselves and Teagasc and ICBF, and there is the issue. There is one contentious, if you like, proposal to increase the weighting of EBI. I personally would not favour that. I think it would be detrimental to the benefits of what has been achieved by EBI. But I do think that there's lots of ways that we can counter this issue without having to interfere with the EBI integrity, if you like.
Okay.
So if you go to the next slide, I suppose it just makes the point that, I mean, look, again, that contentious issue of bull calves being slaughtered, it would appear, if we look at the statistics, without going through the detail of it, that farmers are listening, and that those that are using Jersey are using it more responsibly. They do seem to be taking up more sex semen. They do seem to be using slightly more beef bulls. And I think there's one, well, I've seen this, but there's one line there where if you look at even Jersey cows or Jersey crossbred cows where they're mated to beef bulls, I think there's none of those animals are slaughtered, or very, very almost none. So I mean, it just so that those animals then by definition obviously have found their way into the general beef population or whatever, so presumably are more suitable. And
I think what I found interesting actually, Frank, was that it's almost like if there's an easy way out, people are generally going to take it. And I suppose we did a lot of talking about it this time last year in terms of that we had to act more responsibility in relation to it. And I think the figures are actually really showing that, as you said, is after coming through.
That's where we all want. That's where we all want to be. I mean, we can't have a scenario whereby the system has that crutch, if you want to call it that. And that's what it's often referred to as. And but obviously we have a lot of work to do. I mean, there's no point in shutting those avenues if we're not opening up others and other outlets. And I think that's where a lot of the work. I mean, it's certainly being done, but there is a hell of a lot more to do to ensure that that is fully sorted.
Yeah, so like I suppose just for people that are on the call, all the crossbred calves and all the Frisian bull calves that came out of the herds in Teagasc this year are gone to contract rearers to be followed through in terms of their beef performance. So we are working on delivering information in it.
And actually, if you go back to the previous slide for a second, Stuart, that photograph is taken in a pen in Dairygold Farm, where that's where the Jersey cows are. That's where the pure Jersey cows are. And okay, people would say, oh, he took the pen with the nicest calves and the one that they're all off of Frisians. Definitely, it's no way them are Jerseys. But actually, those calves are off of a mix. I mean, it's to demonstrate that. I mean, we will have used a considerable amount of beef over the last couple of years, but in Moorpark and in the Teagasc herds in general, but also in the Dairygold Farm, which is where the next generation herd is, and the Jerseys are. And so it's all beef from 6 weeks. But even in the first 6 weeks of the breeding season, cows that are underperforming, that are low EBI and so on, we will use beef bulls. And actually, the beef bulls tend to be Charolais, Limousin, some Belgian blue. You can even see the calf in the background there. So there was. So the Angus is run to map up, but we don't use that many Anguses during the AI period. So it tends to be mostly the Continental. So we are adding value, and you can imagine these calves do add considerable value. And the interest now, and I will say what's important to point out is that obviously this is not at the jeopardy of calving ease. I mean, we are still careful. I'm very careful about the bulls that we pick. These are easy calving, and the shortest gestation, Charolais, Limousins, Belgian blues, and so on that are available. And the reality was that we had no calving difficulty issues because we were matching, the farm manager would match the bulls with the cows, such that obviously if you have a small cow that's not likely to produce a Charolais or whatever, well then you don't put a Charolais in it. But some of those Charolais calves are out of purebred Jersey cows, and there wasn't any issue with them.
Yeah.
So it can be done, and it does add considerably to the value of the calf. And as you said, all of these calves went to contract rearers, and because we have a component of the herd that's pedigree Jersey, the pedigree bull calves that were would have been sent to the contract rearers, and you're balancing up, if you like. I mean, you primarily Frisian calves, bull calves. Then on one end you have the zero value, negative value, some might say, pedigree Jersey bulls, but on the other side you have these 250 euro calves.
Okay.
Balance it up, if you like, and it's as a group, or as a crop, if you like, that these animals are sold. It's not on an individual animal basis, in which case then you're left with the Jerseys and you have to, maybe do things that you wouldn't like to do, whatever. But we have to get our mind around models that will work in that regard. And in this case, it's contract rearing, but there's other ways that can be done as well. But it's just to make that point, it worked very, very well. And same thing has been done this year. So I suppose I should work out what the percentage is, but I would be estimating it's about 30% of the semen.
Okay. So just to summarize, I suppose, just before you do summarize, actually, Frank, is there a possible benefit then, so in terms of the crossbreeding of the Jersey, we'll say, with a beef breed, that we'll say, when we see how they perform in terms of consuming more and converting it into milk solids, that there's a potential gain in the beef terms there too, like that?
No, I suppose, well, yes and no. I mean, yeah, there's certainly, if you go to certain, there's other countries in the world that are they have certain crosses that they particularly put on Jerseys. For example, in New Zealand, they're experimenting with Wagyu because they're not totally dissimilar in terms of the type of animal that they are. And I mean, at the end of the day, anyone that has finished or culled Jersey cows and fattened them or whatever, they do fatten and put on condition very, very easily, and they do have a lot of fat, you know, intermuscular fat and so on. So they are, it's actually, incidentally, the work that's been done shows that the eating quality is very, very good. So there is work like that in terms of, but I suppose a lot of those are niche markets. In America, they use Limousin, and it's promoted as the Golden Cross or something, I forget what it is. But at the end of the day, I suppose if you put beef bulls of a higher genetic merit onto those lower merit dairy cows, I mean, at worst, it's going to be a Friesian, isn't it?
Mm.
You know, and but this could be a much bigger issue. I mean, if the likes of exports, calf exports, and so on, you know,
or to dry up, like
was to be taken away, that would be. Then we really see, and I can tell you that the Jersey will be a very small issue then.
Anyway, I suppose you better sum it up there. So
what this work is generally showing, and I suppose, look, it's taken a while to get through it, but I could have put in 3 or 4 times more slides to make it maybe slightly more informative than that. But at the end of the day, I suppose we have to try and keep it short and sweet. And but at the end of the day, it is demonstrating that the EBI is delivering performance consistent with our national objectives. It is showing that we're combining cows that have a high intake capacity of grass. They have one point I didn't go through, maybe to elaborate on, is that they have a good inherent grazing aptitude. I mean, we do see that the high grade cows have a greater hunger, if you like, or a faster grazing pattern and so on. They do maintain a higher positive energy balance on average, and that's, from a practical point of view, is observed in their higher body condition score. And that's tied in with a slightly reduced energetic efficiency, if you like, in terms of the utilization of the grass that's taken in for milk production. But ultimately, that's what's driving the positive attributes of EBI from the point of view of fertility and so on. It's something that I think is very, very important, and clearly is delivering fertility and longevity. And as we see with the high BI cows, they're very much consistent with industry targets, and maybe even surpassing them of late. And this obviously then results in a considerable economic and environmental benefit. And I suppose the other point then in relation to the jerseys is that while we're only 3 years in, it does provide evidence that there is continuing significant genetic merit gain, if you like, within the Jersey breed coming from the breeding programs in New Zealand. And and justifying, if you like, their use here once the other negatives are managed, I suppose. And I suppose what we would like to think is that these results support the continued development of the National Breeding Programme, and hopefully underpin the confidence of our farmers.
Very good. That's excellent, Frank. I suppose when you take the leap forward, I suppose you're more than familiar with it, obviously, from your years doing the belly egg work and so forth. There's camps there that exist, and there are some people that are just not going to crossbreed.
Yeah.
And like the leap forward that the genomics, I suppose, brought to the black and white is beyond doubt, I suppose. But do you see a situation where black and white are going to reach the kind of the intake capacity? Like we said, there's a slightly higher one there in the elite versus the national average. Now I know it's 3.1 versus 3.8 for your crossbred, but do you think that we'll say that Donna is going to be able to select the gene maybe for intake capacity, that we will be able to chase that down a bit more?
I suppose in the short term, I would say no.
Okay.
Right. But at the same time, I suppose in theory, when you talk about what's technically possible, I mean, if you have intake and body weight, if you like, measured on animals, which it's impossible at past, given our system. If it was an indoor system where we had every single cow going to a
box, a weigh
and
box,
you knew what they were eating, and we knew exactly what they were eating, well, then I would say yes. Within 10 years, we could have a scenario whereby we could bridge at least some of that gap. In the absence of being able to select for that type of information, then I would say no. And I would say, and given the progress that's occurring in New Zealand, primarily, with the Jersey breed in a similar type system, I would say that we will always be in a scenario whereby the best jerseys, if you like, will be comparable with the very best black and whites. And I suppose it's not for 1 minute. I mean, what I don't want to be accused of, I suppose, is that I'm advocating the crossbreeding. What I suppose what I'm doing there is demonstrating, I suppose, that those that have followed the research in the past and gone down that route are perfectly justified in doing that. I mean, they have reaped the rewards of it. And scientifically, there's no reason why that won't continue. And like in reality, what those people are doing is, to put it in scientific terms, is that they're capitalizing what's known as additive genetic gain. So in other words, the EBI. So the EBI is the additive genetic component, and that's the genetic merit based on the combination of genes that the animal has within breed. And then we have what's known as the non-additive genetic merit, which is the benefit from heterosis. So that's just basically using all the tools instead of just using one box of tools from a genetic improvement point of view. And there's no doubt about it, there's gains in it. There is headaches and more headaches. Some of them I would think are being overplayed, but at the end of the day, they do need to be managed. And I think there's ways that we can do it. We just need to have a more holistic, if you like, approach to it.
Okay, Frank, that's we're just coming up towards the coffee time, I suppose. So plenty of food for thought anyway. An excellent presentation, great work been done in Kilworth, and keep it up, I'd say, and keep testing the boundaries, I suppose. So thanks a million for coming on with us today, and we'll talk to you again soon. And thanks to everyone for joining, and take care.